graciously volunteered to think about a little tutorial that we might do this time round. And I didn't want to do anything too serious because it's end of term, and I knew that numbers were down because people were away. But I have taken from various sources, including the redoubtable Speaker's Guide, a distillation of the 5 most important things, the most important lessons in making a speech, which is what came through the discussion last time round. So, during the break, during the summer break, there will be some discussions between the club's officers about how we're going to do this, how we're going to bring in some more tutorials that are geared to what people need, because not everybody comes for the same reason. Old codgers like us come because we just like the company and it's a chat and it's a night out. Some people come because they want to learn how to make presentations, they want to learn, it's important for their job. And some people come because they're shy and they want to learn about interacting with people. So if we can tailor what we do to those things, to what people want, then I don't see any reason. For example, Julie a long time ago did an evaluation, very good evaluation tutorial, which is now sort of lost in time, unless you recorded it somewhere, I don't know.
Quite possibly,
yeah.
Under training.
But I don't see any reason why, if we do them, we can't record them and have them available for people later on. We can put them on a memory stick, we can do them again, it will make a difference. So, what we're not going to do is what I'm going to do tonight in a moment, which is throw a piece of paper at you and say, read this with me. That's a good test. But my theme tonight is not completion, but lack of preparation. Would you just pass those down, if you would, thank you. And I'll go through the paragraphs with you one by one, and then I will explain what I'm going to do after that. So this is a distillation of the wisdom of the great and the good, the 5 most important lessons in making a speech. 1, know your audience. Now that
rings a bell.
Evaluating your speech, but that comes out very strongly from the first speech that Tanya gave. So well done to that. Also Brian did the same thing because he tuned in very carefully to the fact that a substantial proportion of the audience are women, and he really worked that one well. Clever. Yeah. So, know your audience. Probably the most important thing. I mean, if you don't know your audience and what they want, then you're wasting your time. Yeah. Second one clear message. Memorable speeches can be summarized in single sentences. Wow. Should move from a central idea, make the argument that supports the idea, remove anything that does not strengthen it. That's very high level. That's very high level speech making. Keep it simple, clear structure to follow, and remember what you say. I mean, if I may say, Brian's speech is an example of that. Very clear structure, clear message, every example, reinforce the message, explain the message more. Excellent speech. Wish I'd done it, Brian. So capture attention, make 2 or 3 main points. Everybody who's really up in this says try not to make more than 3 or 4 points. 3 is best. After that, the audience is starting to get lost. And keep it clear. So bind up your message with stories. Don't just give out information, but try and make it a story. Try and make it something more interesting for the audience that illustrates the main point. And practice for delivery, not memorization. This is an important point. If you're anything like me, when I started off, when I had a speech, I wanted to make sure that I got every single word into that speech. It had to be exactly right, because that was my upbringing, that was my training, that was my job. You couldn't afford to lose a word. And that's not the way to do speeches. So those who do so well in the task say. And that brings me to the speech that I'm going to give to you tonight, which is all about lack of preparation, because I have roughed out a speech this afternoon. It is full of errors that you will immediately be able to discern. It will enable you to pay me back for all that terrible topic I gave you last time around, space exploration, which I thought you would enjoy, but and I have typed the speech, I have read it, I have not spoken it. One of the big lessons that you learn is that speaking your speech is very different from reading it. Timing's different, the amount of time you take is different, everything's different. So, there you go, there's a summary at the bottom. So my apologies for just giving you a piece of paper and saying read that with me as we go along, but I thought it would be helpful if you just had that little structure in hand while you assassinate me over the following speech. So, everything is preparation in speech making, and tonight is lack of preparation, but eventually completion. It's supposed to be looking at.
Sorry.
So,
Well done.
I shall now come back to the lectern to rapturous applause. Too kind, too kind. Fellow speakers, departed guest. Chair. I'm sure there must be many occasions on which you sit down and scratch your head and think bewilderedly and think and say to yourself, what did King George III ever do for me? And to find that answer, we have to go back a little way in history because it's an important question. And we have to go back to his grandfather, King George I. Now you see, there was a problem in England. There was a problem in England at the death of Queen Anne. And Queen Anne was a person of quite distinct beauty of her time, and was married and had 18 children. 18 pregnancies, I should say. 18 pregnancies, some of which produced living children, none of which survived. And she was played in a recent film by Olivia Colman. You might have seen it?
Yeah.
The Queen. It was a really cracking film, and it was the most interesting time of the 18th century. But the problem was, of course, that we run out of kings and queens. We had no. That was it. That was it. No one could trace in England anyone who had any greater claim to the throne. And so the aristocracy concluded quite correctly that they were in trouble because you can't have an aristocracy unless you have a monarchy. So they all whizzed off here and there, and of course they found the connections we had with Germany. And they went over to Germany, to Hanover, and because there was a connection, distant connection from Queen Anne to Hanover. And there they found, in a cupboard, a geezer called the Elector of Hanover. And they said to him, would you like to come and be King of England? We're a bit stuck. And he said, it's English, 9. They said, we'll take that as a yes. And he became George I of England, most reluctantly. He did not like the English very much. He did not like the English at all. But to be frank, he liked, well, how shall I say it, he liked English women quite a lot. He never actually learned to speak English, he just learned to speak little phrases. Just little phrases like, good evening, my dear, how pretty you are. Would you like to come and see the ceiling of the King's bedchamber? The Matilda effect had had little impact on good old King George I. But anyway, he died after having done absolutely nothing really, and was succeeded by George II, who did even less. He was also born in Germany, didn't speak English and hated the English, but never mind, there's nothing much to say about him until he pegged out and was succeeded by George III, who became king in 1760. And he had the longest reign in English history, was widely regarded as a good king, sensible, sober, dutiful, personal, moral, unfortunately afflicted by a disorder called porphyria, and may also have been bipolar. Lots of films about King George, The Madness of King George, you might remember that, Helen Mirren's and that. Lots of others. There's just been that awful series Bridgerton where the outcome of that appeared with him, but never mind, we won't say too much about that. So the question remains, what did King George III ever do for you? Did he do for you? Well, the first thing King George did for you was to lose the American colonies. Already been mentioned once. Wonderful, humiliating disasters, I won't go through them, you all remember the Boston Tea Party, 1773, the Americans still go on about it. Hang there, don't forget the Boston Tea Party. Anyway, America became independent, and just reflect on what a favour King George III did for you in losing the colonies. If it were not for him, we might still be in charge of America. Just think of that. And we'd be threatening to invade Greenland and starve Cuba and send petrol prices through the roof and make a joke of democracy and put a big golden statue to this funny man with funny hair and a fat ass. So, sorry, just be grateful that good old King George III lost the American colonies, because if it hadn't been good old King George, losing so graciously, we'd be in charge of the biggest mess on the planet, and we've got enough problems. Actually, there's a rumour that America might take part in the Eurovision Song Contest next time. Just a rumour. And I think that would be great, because we wouldn't come bottom anymore, would we? Anyway, that's the first thing King George did for you. The second thing that King George did for you was to increase stamp duty on the purchase of land. It wasn't a new thing. There'd been stamp duty before that. It started off way back in 1603, really. But King George was short of money, and he thought, how can I do something that will improve the coffers of the king? And so he looked upon this, and they found it was a hugely unpopular tax. But of course, it meant that when people buy land or property, they borrow money to do it. So you borrowed the money to pay your tax, so it didn't hurt so much, so he thought. And the reason why it was so important was that he used that stamp duty to pay the money for the war with America, which he lost graciously and luckily, and also the war with France that defeated Napoleon Bonaparte. So that's what King George did for you. If it hadn't been for stamp duty, Napoleon might have won, and we'd all be speaking French and eating snails for breakfast. Not that I have anything against the French, good football team. But never mind, the next time you buy a house and you grudge paying stamp duty, just remember what King George did for you. He did it for you, well actually, he did it for himself, and he did it for the aristocracy. But that's the way it goes. But the third and most significant thing perhaps that King George did for you is called enclosure. Every time you go on holiday, and then fly back across the English Channel, you come across the Channel, you go over a little town called Seaford, which is not far from where I used to live in Sussex, and you can look down and see that beautiful patchwork of quilt-patterned fields. Beautiful system of drainage hedges, everything looks neat, everything looks organised. And that is the very essence of English. And you can thank King George III for that. Because the third thing that King George III did for you was to enclose the common land. Because your ancestors had a very different life to us. You see, George took a personal interest in farming and agriculture improvement, which earned him the popular name Farmer George when they weren't calling him Mad George. The Industrial Revolution was just starting. George knew that they had to have more efficient farming because they had to pay for the people who were working in the factories. They needed food. And the old system, the common system, wasn't very effective. But when I say wasn't very effective, for centuries the agricultural land was organised as open fields, large unfenced strips, cultivated by individual villagers, and people relied on that. The common people could go, graze animals, gather firewood, cut peat, glean firewood, crops for harvest, and that system was a lifeline for those many smallholders and cottagers. And it was really important. They relied on it for their survival. But the Enclosure Acts of George III fundamentally transformed the English countryside. And they replaced the open field system with a regime of privately owned, bounded land. And that is the land that you see when you come back from your expensive holiday and you down on this beautiful patchwork quilt, and you go across Surrey and you can see all the swimming pools and everything else. So the poorer independent smallholders and common holders who'd been self-sufficient were dispossessed. They became landless agricultural labourers working for wages, and those just drifted into the industrial towns. And those were our ancestors. The way it worked, you see, was that when the land was enclosed, it tended to be given to the great landed families and the people who already had quite large chunks of land. The wealthy farmers and aristocrats had been around for generations. And that's the way it stayed. Because these days, hold your breath, less than 1% of the population owns about half of England's land. So in a sense, George did it for you lot, the common people, so that you would know your place in society. But never mind, it's good old England as you know it. God bless King George III. God bless the aristocracy. God bless the great landowners. Tough on you lot. Riddled with errors. I will